Hello everyone, this is Joe W. Today I'm going to show you my top 5 favourite Snell albums and top 5 weakest Snell albums of the 1980s in my opinion. I'm going to start with my top 5 weakest albums of the 1980s first. Now, they're not necessarily bad albums, but it's just qualities that aren't as strong as some of the other 80s Now albums. Let's get to it. Coming in at number 5 is Now 10. Don't get me wrong, Now 10 is fine, though it doesn't beat a lot of 80s Now albums in my opinion. Now, this one's much better than this 2 in my opinion. I may like the second half of this one with some rock songs, some of my favourites being from Kiss and Whitesnake, also a lot of good ones from Heart, Billy Idol, and The Alarm. And of course, I like the Communard's song Never Can Say Goodbye, which is on the first half of disc 1, of course. It has some good pop songs from Hue and Cry, Pet Shop Boys, Style Cancel, Johnny Hates Jazz. Now, disc 2, I like the beginning bit, particularly Curiosity to Kill the Cat and Lost Lobos. And disc 2 had a solid ending as well from Squeeze, and also one of my favourite Christmas classics from Pogues and Courtesy McCall. The rest of the disc 2 was just alright. It had some duds for me like Crockett's Theme and My Baby Just Cares For Me, which I know a lot of people love those two, but, just not for me. But there's some good ones in the middle, like Erasure. Yeah, so it's just a fine album. That's why it's my number 5 of my somewhat weakest Now albums of the 1980s. Coming in at number 4 is Now 5. Like Now 10, it's just fine, but it's just not as strong as the other 80s Now albums. This 2 is much better than this one, in my opinion, apart from a commentator's track, No 90 Not Out, which is just awful, in my opinion. But I like the first half of this 2 with a lot of great pop ones, including one of my favourite underrated songs from the Conway Brothers, Turn It Up. And the second half has some great rock tunes as well. My favourites from Katrina and the Waves, Gary Moore with Phil Lynott, and Style Cancel. Just a lot of great tracks on this 2. This one was just okay. I mean, maybe the first half was really solid. My favourites being from Harold Faltermeyer and Finding on Cannibals. It has a good opening from Duran Duran. The second half was just okay. Of course, main highlights being from Simple Minds, and I quite like the Power Station's cover of T-Rex's Get It On. So it's just a fine album in my opinion. So that's why it's number 4 of my somewhat weakest albums of the 1980s. Coming in at number 3 is Now 6. Now 6 is just alright. This one has a solid opening, actually, with one of my favourite Queen songs, One Vision, and of course, Nick Kershaw's When It Heartbeats has now become my second favourite Nick Kershaw song behind I Won't Let the Sun Go Down on Me. A lot of great tracks as well from Simple Minds, Eurythmics. I quite like the Gary Moore one as well, and also one of my favourite Bryan Adams songs is Only Love, which is sadly not on the CD version, but I still got the vinyl version though. And the second half was just fine. I had some pretty good ones from Elton John, Tina Turner, Level 42, though. Part of the ending is kind of weak, with UB40's Don't Break My Heart, which is kind of weak to me, and Separate Lives from Phil Collins, just kind of a meh track for a Phil Collins song, really. This 2 was just alright. Of course, I have some favourites like Baltimore Tarzan Boy, which is one of my favourite underrated tracks, also followed by Maria Vidal and Mid-Year. It has some good tracks from Arcadia, Lloyd Cole and Commotions, Madness, and the rest of the tracks are just alright, but also a dud from Paul Castle, really, but it's not as bad as 19. But Now 6, overall, it's just alright, so that's why it's in the third place of somewhat weakest albums of the 1980s, in my opinion. My second weakest album of the 1980s, in my opinion, is Now 11. Now, this one's better than this 2, in my opinion. This one had a really good start from Pet Shop Boys, and followed by one of my favourite Bruno Carl songs, Heaven Is a Place on Earth. First half was pretty solid, actually, with Billy Ocean, Eddie Grant, of course, and Morrissey. And also, the second half of this one is alright. I have some highlights like Johnny H. Jazz, Billy Idol, and also ending with one of my favourite Whitesnake songs, Give Me All Your Love, which is sadly not on the re-released version. Now, disc 2 is more of a mixed bag. The first two are pretty good, though. I had mixed feelings about the rest of the first half. Some duds like Joyce Sims and Vanessa Paradis, in my opinion, and kind of a meh cover of Lower More from Dollar. And also, the second half of disc 2 was pretty strong. I have some great dance songs. My favourites being from Bomb the Bass and Crush, and also, although it had a weak finish, I had a meh track from Two Men, a drum machine and a trumpet, and also Corey Fisher's weakest one, Rise to the Occasion, in my opinion. So now I've been just kind of an average, now in my opinion. So that's why it's at number 2 of my top 5 weakest albums of the 1980s. My weakest album of the 1980s, in my opinion, is Now 15. Just kind of average, but a bit worse than Now and Now 11. This one had a really good start, actually, with Queen, Simple Minds, and of course, Good Thing by Finely and Cannibals now become my second favourite Finely and Cannibals song behind Johnny Come Home. And of course, the rest of the first half was actually pretty solid, like In Excess, Roxette, and also Paul McCartney. The second half of this one's just okay. I mean, it had a pretty weak finishes like Cliff Richard and Hue and Cry, just their meh tracks. Now, this 2 is more of a mixed bag. I have some highlights, my favourite 2 being from D-Mob and Double Trouble with Rebel MC. And of course, had some good songs from Bobby Brown, Inner City, Pet Shop Boys. Bananarama's Cool Summer 1989 was pretty good too, although, yeah, the rest of it just either okay or I had some few duds like, my least favourite Cure song, Lullaby, and also Jive Bunny. I'm sorry, Jive Bunny is just not my kind of thing. I know it's to some people's guilty pleasure, but Jive Bunny's tracks is just cheap to me now. So Now 15 is just kind of average, so that's why it's the weakest Now album of 1980s in my opinion. So let's get to my top 5 favourite 1980s Now albums now. Current number 5 of my favourite Now albums of the 1980s is Now 13. Really solid Now album. This one was strong, particularly the second half. I mean, the first 3 on this one were really strong. Of course, my favourites from Yaz and Erasure, with little respect, one of my favourite 80 songs of all time. Womack's Teardrops was really great too. The second half had some more highlights. My favourites being with Brian Ferry and Bomber Bass, and of course, a lot of good tracks from Kim Wilde, Bobby McFerrin, Arts of Noise with Tom Jones, and of course, Brief Hands to Heaven was a nice feel-good track. So a lot of good ones. Though this 2 slightly beats this one, in my opinion. I mean, I particularly love the second half, with some rock tunes. My favourites being from Level 42, Jane Wilder, and of course, Proclaimers 500 Miles, which is an iconic classic. And of course, we have Human League, Love Is All That Matters, even though it missed the top 40, but I'm glad it's here because it's a very underrated track. I had some good dance tracks in the first half of this 2 as well. Apart from D-Mob's, we call it Acid, which I found pretty annoying in my opinion, but it's a lot of good dance tracks as well from Salt and Pepper, We Papa Girl Rappers, and rest in peace to one of them. And also Inner City, Big Fun's my favourite Inner City song, by the way. So, really solid Now album. That's why it's my 5th favourite Now album of the 1980s. Coming in at number 4 is ironically Now 4. That's not the reason why it's at number 4, but it's a really great Now album, which recently went up in my rankings after liking Dr. Doctor from Thompson Twins more over the years. And of course, this one had a really good start as well, although Paul McCartney's No More Every Night is just a bit of a mid-track to me. But Together Electric Dreams really kicks things off, of course, being one of my favourite 80s songs ever, followed by my second favourite Bonsky Beat song, Why, behind Small Town Boy. And of course, a lot of great songs from John Waite, Limahl. Also, Michael Jackson on there is a kind of rarity, of course, being in the Motown label. The second half of this 2 had a very strong start as well from Culture Club, Julian Lennon, and Style Cancel. Of course, Elton John's Passages is one of my favourite underrated Elton John songs. Now, this 2 had a really strong start with a lot of great rock tunes, my favourites being from Status Quo and U2. And the second half of this 2 was fine too. I mean, It has my favourites from Ray Parker Jr. and Rockwell. A lot of good tunes as well from Level 42, and I quite like that Eurythmics one. And then, although we had that dud from Malcolm McLaren, but it's overall a great disc, and Now 4 is overall really great Now album in my opinion, so that's why it's my 4th favourite Now album of the 1980s. Coming in at number 3 is Now That's Hardcore Music 1. Yes, the very first one. It's not just the reason why, but it's also a really solid track listing. This one has a lot of great songs, my favourites being from Duran Duran, Casey and the Sunshine Band, Culture Club, Men Without Hats. A lot of great classics from Phil Collins, UB40, Bonnie Tyler. I also found Rocksteady Crew guilty pleasure to me. Just a really solid disc with some solid songs. This too has also had a pretty strong start as well. Of course, my favourites being from Human League and Howard Jones. Also has my favourite Simple Minds song Waterfront later on, and a lot of good songs from Genesis, The Cure, Madness. Just a really solid track list in my opinion to kick off all the Now That's Hardcore Music albums. That's why it's my 3rd favourite Now album of the 1980s. My 2nd favourite Now album of the 1980s is Now 7. This one, again, had a really strong start from a Peter Gabriel Sledgehammer, of course, for my favourite ones from UB40 and Sly Fox. For my other great ones as well, Level 42, Pet Shop Boys. Also like that Camouflage by Stan Ridgway, which was pretty underrated. Even though we had 2 duds after that, in my opinion, Paranormia and Radiohead, some of my least favourite 80s tracks. But really picks up again with my favourite Genesis song, Invisible Touch, followed by some other great rock tunes from Big Country, Simple Minds, The House Martins. I also had ended with a pretty decent one from Mid-Year Recall of the Wild, which I liked a bit more over the years. Yeah, and this too had a really solid start as well. One of my favourite Wham songs, and also Owen Paul. Yeah, a lot of great classics as well from Doctor and the Medics with their solid cover of Spirit in the Sky. I also liked Bananarama, Aha. Of course, in the middle we have a bonus track from Queen, Is It Kind of Magic, which is one of my favourite Queen songs as well. Before we get to a really fun one from Billy Ocean. The second half of this too was pretty mixed, but had some pretty good highlights, including one of my favourite underrated tracks from Midnight Star, Headlines. I would say this one's a bit better than this too, but it's still really solid Now in my opinion. That's my 2nd favourite Now album of the 1980s. Let's get to my number 1. My favourite Now album of the 1980s is Now 12. Just a brilliant summer album in my opinion. This one has some really good songs, particularly the second half, with some of my favourites from Johnny H. Jazz and Voice of a Beehive. A lot of great tunes from Morrissey, Danny Wilson. Also a rare appearance from Iron Maiden. And has some great feel-good summer classics in the first half as well from Brenda Carlisle and Cliffy Fisher. And it also has one of my favourite underrated Elton John songs, I Don't Want to Go On With You Like That. And Phil Collins in the Air Tonight was a good addition as well. It's just a shame it's not on the re-released version. Now, this too, however, is absolutely great to me. Of course, starting with some of my favourites from the Time Lords and Sabrina, and of course a lot of great pop tunes like from Jermaine Stewart, the Communards, which leads into some of my favourite dance classics in the 1980s from S-Express and Salt and Pepper. And also, I like that throwback from Rose Royce Car Wash. It's just a lot of great tunes on this one, although apart from James Brown's Payback Mix and Will Downing Love Supreme in my opinion, but overall it's a brilliant summer Now album in my opinion, and it's my favourite Now album of the 1980s. Now, here are all my rankings of the 1980s Now albums. Well, I hope you enjoyed seeing my top 5 favourite Now albums and top 5 weakest Now albums of the 1980s. Comment down below your favourite Now album of the 1980s and your least favourite Now album of the 1980s. See you next video.